Heyo there, what do you hear, what do you say, Sankazer here, and today I'd like to talk about some of the actions of the New Atheists and responding to Majesty of Reason's critique of the New Atheist movement. But first, at the outset, I'd like to detail what this document is not. This document is not an attack. This presentation is not an attack on Majesty of Reason or Whitley Kaufman. I have deep respect for both of them, acknowledging their contributions to philosophical discourse. I have been influenced from their various views that Majesty of Reason has put forward, and they have significantly influenced me in various ways. I think that their videos are insightful, thought-provoking, and highly valuable, and I think their efforts to spread philosophy on YouTube are commendable, and I believe are great contributions to public philosophy. I think that public philosophy itself is vital for fostering critical thinking and informed discourse. I think that platforms such as Majesty of Reason make philosophical ideas accessible and engaging to a broader audience, and I am trying to take the critiques seriously and engage with them thoughtfully. There will be no psychologizing, rudeness, or dismissiveness, and I will try to make a concerted effort to engage the arguments and the critiques with respect and intellectual honesty, fostering a productive and respectful dialogue. So, an overview of New Atheism. New Atheism is a modern movement that advocates for atheism with an assertive and confrontational approach. Emerging in the early 21st century, it aims to challenge religious belief and promote secularism, emphasizing scientific inquiry and rational thought. There are four key significant figures. Richard Dawkins, an evolutionary biologist, he's renowned for his book The God Delusion, published in 2006, which argued that belief in God is a delusion and that religion is harmful to society. His work has brought new atheist ideas to a broad audience and has sparked widespread debate. Sam Harris is a neuroscientist and philosopher. Harris authored The End of Faith, published in 2004, and Letters to a Christian Nation, published in 2006, critiquing organized religion and advocating for a rational approach to ethics. His writings have influenced discussions on religion, morality, and secularism. Christopher Hitchens, a journal and literary critic. Hitchens is known for his polemical style. His book, God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything, in 2007, critiques religion as a source of conflict and irrationality. Hitchens' eloquent and confrontational debates have made a significant impact on public discourse. Daniel Dennett is a philosopher and cognitive scientist. Dennett's Breaking the Spell, Religion as a Natural Phenomena, also in 2006, examines religion through evolutionary biology and cognitive science. His scholarly approach provokes a scientific understanding of religion, contributing to the intellectual foundations of New Atheism. And so, in conclusion, the New Atheist movement, spearheaded by figures such as Dawkins, Harris, Hitchens, and Dennett, has significantly influenced public discourse on religion. Through their books, debates, and public engagements, they have promoted a secular and scientific worldview, challenging religious dogma, and bringing atheist ideas to the mainstream. And here I will be trying to summarize the critiques levied at the New Atheist by Whitley Kaufman article that will be published in the description down below. So, when it comes to the intellectual contribution, Kaufman argues that New Atheists have added little to the philosophical debate, presenting a caricature of religion rather than engaging in serious and intellectual discourse. They are criticized for being uninterested in exploring the philosophical arguments for and against religion, insisting instead that there is no real debate to be had. Rhetorical strategy, the movement is marked by strident and militant tone, employing derogatory language towards religion and its followers. This rhetorical approach is seen as extreme and self-righteous, lacking in genuine intellectual engagement, and instead relying on shaming and ridicule. Empirical claims on religion. New Atheists are faulted for treating the existence of God as a scientific hypothesis, which critics argue is a flawed approach. Religion claims are often transcendental and interpretive, not empirical, and thus beyond the scope of scientific inquiry. Misinterpretation of science. They claim that recent scientific advancements have settled the debate on God's existence, a stance that is disputed by critics. This approach oversimplifies complex philosophical issues and misrepresents the nature of scientific inquiry. Historical and sociological arguments. Kaufman contends that New Atheists oversimplify the role of religion in violence and conflict, ignoring its positive roles like charitable work and moral reform. The arguments are seen as biased, failing to provide a balanced view of religion's role in history. Political and social strategy. The confrontational tactics of New Atheists may increase polarization rather than foster productive dialogue. Kaufman sees their aggressive rhetoric as an overreaction, particularly in response to events like 9/11, and questioned the effectiveness of such a strategy. Scientism. New Atheists are accused of promoting scientism, the belief that science is the only valid form of knowledge, which dismisses other disciplines and undermines their credibility. This narrow view alienates potential allies in other fields and limits the scope of their critique. A lack of a positive alternative. Kaufman highlights the New Atheists' failure to offer viable policy prescriptions or alternatives to religious belief. Their approach is seen as dismissive, ignoring the psychological and social needs that religion fulfills for many people. Tribalism and ideology. The movement exhibits its own form of tribalism and ideological rigidity, mirroring the behaviors that criticize in religious communities. Kaufman argues that this ideological stance hinders productive debate and reflects a simplistic dichotomy between reason and faith. So, in conclusion, Kaufman argues the new atheist movement has hindered rather than advanced the philosophical debate on religion. Their strategies, marked by aggressive rhetoric and a lack of intellectual engagement, has not been effective in achieving their goals and may have increased polarization instead. So, a brief response to Kaufman's critique. I'll be elaborating on each of them in turn later. But with respect to the intellectual contribution, I broadly agree. New atheists are primarily a social movement, not a philosophical one. Critiquing them for not contributing to philosophy is akin to criticizing a pianist for not knowing how to skateboard. I think that when it comes to the sort of movement as a whole, the primary goal was not to sort of become like an intellectual movement, but the primary goal was to sort of bring atheism into the mainstream. When it comes to their influence, while they may not contribute directly, they do influence others. For example, YouTubers such as Rationality Rules and Cosmic Skeptic, influenced by the New Atheists, have become more philosophically engaged. So this is at least one instance of them having a positive intellectual contribution in some sense. Derogatory tone towards religion. I would argue that this is, for the most part, justified. The derogatory stance towards religion is often justified. In the American social context, where religion can be aggressively fundamentalist, a strong counter-response can be necessary. And something to keep in mind is that, and often is the case that they're actually just reciprocating what's already found in religious texts and religious behavior. Many religions have historically been derogatory towards atheists and non-believers. Whenever it comes to the effectiveness, aggressive atheism might be more effective in promoting secular values rather than a mild-mannered approach. However, this is just an open empirical question that requires more data. When it comes to the empirical claims, I think this is a broadly fair critique. The critique that the new atheists treat God as an empirical hypothesis, and this is sort of misguided, is fair. However, many religious apologists also treat God as an empirical hypothesis, especially in arguments about fine-tuning or design, where they treat God as though he were some sort of unobservable, in which case God can simply be treated using the same sort of theoretical virtues that any unobservable is also going to receive as well. When it comes to oversimplification and facile remarks, this is a warranted critique. The critique that new atheists often oversimplify and make facile remarks is valid. However, they may just be attempted to counterbalance the overwhelmingly positive perception of religion by some people by highlighting its flaws. Scientism, you could make dozens of videos about scientism in and of itself. However, I'm just going to restrict myself by stating that there are defensible versions of scientism, and most new atheists likely do not endorse incoherent versions. So the four previously mentioned, Dawkins, Dennett, Hitchens, and Harris, most likely do recognize other valid ways of truth, such as mathematics and testimony, just to give two examples. With respect to policy prescriptions, I do not believe that it is morally obligatory for public figures to provide policy solutions. Their role is to raise awareness, not to act as policymakers. For instance, believing in human-driven climate change doesn't require one to know the best way to combat it. And divisiveness, I wholeheartedly agree. Large-scale social movements often foster divisiveness and an us versus them mentality. This is a regrettable but seemingly endemic aspect of such movements. So, responding to critiques of intellectual contributions, I agree. New atheists are primarily a social movement, not a philosophical one, as previously stated. When it comes to their philosophical impact, the new atheists have a reinvigorated public interest in philosophical discussions about religion, existence, and ethics. By bringing these topics to a wider audience, they have indirectly encouraged more people to explore and engage with philosophical ideas. Their critique of religion often incorporate philosophical arguments about the nature of belief, evidence, and rationality, even if these are not developed in the same extent as in academic philosophy, and this has helped popularize key philosophical concepts and debates. So their social and cultural contributions are quite significant, though. They have successfully challenged the social taboo against criticizing religion, opening up space for more open and critical discussions about religious beliefs and practices. This cultural shift is significant in promoting a more rational and evidence-based approach to public discourse, I believe. By emphasizing the importance of science and secular ethics, they have contributed to a broader cultural movement that values critical thinking and skepticism in some ways, I would argue. So, in conclusion, the intellectual contributions of new atheists should be seen in the context of their primary goals and achievements. While they may not have made significant academic contributions, their influence on public discourse and their role in fostering a more critical and secular society are substantial. With respect to the claim that they are making derogatory remarks towards religion, I would say that this is true, right? It just is the case that the four people aforementioned do use this sort of divisive and sort of like, like overblown and aggressive rhetoric, right? However, in response to this, I would say that a significant proportion of religious belief in America is fundamentalist in nature, promoting dogmatic and often harmful ideologies. This warrants a serious and robust response. New Atheist targets these extreme forms of religion, emphasizing the need to challenge and counteract their influence. The impact of these aggressively criticizing fundamentalist religion can be seen as an effective strategy to diminish its impact. By highlighting the absurdities and dangers of fundamentalist belief, New Atheists aim to provoke critical thinking and encourage people to question dogmas. This approach can help reduce the influence of harmful religious ideologies. And another thing to consider is that religions have historically made absurd caricatures of atheists and other religions. They're not trustworthy, they're not good, the list goes on and on. For centuries, religious institutions have portrayed non-believers and adherents of other faiths in derogatory and dehumanizing ways. The strong language used by New Atheists can be seen as a counterbalance to this historical trend, aiming to level the playing field in the discourse on belief. And another thing to consider is that there is a substantial amount of persecution of atheists worldwide. In many parts of the world, atheists and unbelievers face severe persecution, including being killed, maimed, ostracized for rejecting belief in God. In this context, the New Atheists are not the aggressors, but are responding to the violent and oppressive actions of religious institutions and society. So, in conclusion, the assertive and sometimes harsh critique of religion by New Atheists should be understood within the broader social context. Their approach is a response to the significant influence of fundamentalist religion, historical mischaracterizations by religious institutions, and the real dangers faced by atheists globally. By challenging religious dogma aggressively, they aim to promote a more rational and secular society. With respect to the empirical hypothesis critique, I think that this is, by and large, a fair critique. The critique that New Atheists treat God as an empirical hypothesis is fair. New Atheists often argue against the existence of God by demanding empirical evidence and treating the concept of God as a hypothesis that can be tested and potentially falsified. However, this approach is consistent with how many religious apologists also frame their arguments. For instance, in discussions about fine-tuning or intelligent design, apologists often present God as an explanatory hypothesis for the empirical phenomena we observe in the universe. When it comes to the fine-tuning argument, apologists argue that the precise conditions necessary for life in the universe suggest intentional calibration by a designer, which they identify as God. This treats God as an unobservable entity that explains an unobservable phenomena, similar to how scientists propose unobservable entities to explain empirical data. Again, the design argument, the complexity and functionality of biological organisms are presented by apologists as evident of an intelligent designer. Again, this treats God as an empirical hypothesis intended to account for specific empirical observations. So when God is treated as an empirical hypothesis, it is appropriate for critics, including the New Atheists, to subject this hypothesis to the same scrutiny as any other scientific claim. This includes evaluating the explanatory power, simplicity, and causal adequacy of the hypothesis. In some contexts, New Atheist critiques can be seen as legitimate and necessary. They apply the same standards of evidence and reasoning used in scientific inquiry to the claims made by religious apologists. So the treatment of God as an empirical hypothesis invites philosophical debate about the nature of evidence, the limits of scientific inquiry, and raises question about whether certain types of claims, especially those including metaphysical entities, can be meaningfully tested or falsified. While some may argue that religious claims are beyond the scope of empirical investigation, the fact that apologists use empirical arguments open the door for New Atheists to respond in kind. When it comes to oversimplification and facile remarks, this is by and large a warranted critique. The critique that the New Atheists are often oversimplify complex issues and make facile remarks is valid. Their rhetoric can sometimes reduce nuanced religious beliefs and practices to simplistic and dismissive characterizations and caricatures. This approach can undermine the depth and variety of religious experiences, beliefs, and traditions, failing to acknowledge the complexities inherent in faith and spirituality. However, New Atheists may be attempting to counterbalance the overwhelmingly positive perception of religion by highlighting its flaws. In societies where religion is often seen as an unquestionable good, their provocative critiques seem to challenge and disrupt this narrative. By emphasizing the negative aspects of religion, such as fundamentalism, dogmatism, and historical abuses, they aim to provoke critical thinking and encourage a more balanced view of religious institutions, I would argue. So, when it comes to their simplifications, you could argue that a lot of it is quite strategic. The use of simplified arguments can be seen as a strategic choice to engage in a broader audience. Complex philosophical arguments may not resonate with the general public, whereas clear, straightforward critiques can be more impactful and accessible. This approach helps to demystify religion and make the case for atheism more relatable to those who might not have the time or inclination to engage with more sophisticated philosophical debates. Highlighting hypocrisy and harm. New atheists often focus on instances where religious institutions have acted hypocritically or caused harm. By spotlighting these issues, they aim to hold religious organizations accountable and to question the moral high ground that these institutions often claim. This can include highlighting cases of corruption, abuse, and the imposition of dogmatic beliefs that conflict with scientific understanding and individual freedoms. So while the critique of oversimplification and facile remarks is valid, it is important to understand the context and purpose behind this approach. Responding to the claim of scientism, I think there are defensible versions of scientism. So, strictly speaking, scientism defined typically, also a quick addendum, when it comes to pretty much any philosophically contentious issue, there are going to be multiple competing definitions. But for the sake of this conversation, we're going to stipulate that scientism in its strongest form is the view that science is the only valid source of knowledge. This extreme version is often criticized for being incoherent, namely because it's sort of self-refuting, and also because it dismisses other forms of knowledge such as mathematics, ethics, aesthetics, which cannot be empirically tested. However, there are weaker forms of scientism. A more defensible version of scientism, which is the one likely endorsed by the most prominent members of the New Atheist movement, posits that science is the best method for understanding empirical reality, while recognizing that other ways of knowing, such as mathematics and philosophical reasoning, are valid. So Richard Dawkins emphasizes the power of the scientific method to uncover truth about the natural world, but he does not seem to dismiss other forms of knowledge. For example, he has often praised literature and the role of philosophy in various ways in addressing ethical questions, and he values literature when it comes to exploring human experiences. Harris argues for the use of science in understanding human well-being and morality, but also seems to deeply engage with philosophical arguments in his own way. He recognizes that empirical data must be interpreted within a broader philosophical context. Hitchens uses historical and literary analysis to critique of religion, demonstrating a broad intellectual approach that goes beyond strict empiricism. His arguments often appeal to ethical reasoning and historical evidence. As a philosopher, Dennett integrates scientific findings with philosophical inquiry. He emphasizes the importance of interdisciplinary approaches and acknowledges that understanding consciousness and ethics involves more than just empirical science. So, when it comes to scientism, I think that if you sort of construe scientism as saying something like the science is the best guide to empirical reality, I think that sort of version, once you sort of cash out best in terms of the theoretical virtues, I think that's defensible. Science provides systematic, testable, and repeatable methods for understanding the natural world, leading to reliable and objective knowledge. And I think that this view does not exclude other forms of knowledge, but sees them as complementary. For instance, mathematical truths are discovered through logical reasoning. Ethical insights can be gained through sort of philosophical reflection, equilibrium, empirical data on human well-being, and so forth. With respect to policy prescriptions, I think that one common critique is that the New Atheists have not made systematic efforts to propose policy prescriptions to solve the issues that they highlight, such as FGM or some various other issues. This criticism argues that by focusing solely on criticizing religion, they fail to offer constructive solutions. So I think there are a couple responses to this. One is that I think there is no moral obligation for the New Atheists to make such policy proposals. New Atheists are primarily critics of religion, not policymakers. The act of criticism does not inherently require the formulation of a detailed policy solutions. Their main objective is to expose the problems associated with the religious belief systems and advocate for a secular and rational approach to life. I think that when it comes to the role of critique in public discourse, critiquing a position effectively can be sufficient to initiate important conversations and drive social change. By highlighting the flaws and dangers in religious doctrines, new atheists encourage public and policy discussions on how to address these issues without necessarily providing specific solutions themselves. There are practical constraints as well. All key figures in the New Atheist movement, Dawkins, Harris, Hitchens, and Dennett, have full-time careers in academia, writing, and public speaking. Their contributions to the discourse were made within the constraints of their particular professional and personal lives. Dedicating significant time to develop optimal policy prescriptions is not a moral obligation for individuals primarily engaged in critique and public education. And I think they have a significant amount of impact through awareness. Raising awareness and fostering critical thinking are significant contributions. By educating the public on the dangers of religious fundamentalism and promoting scientific thought, new atheists have laid the groundwork for others, including policymakers and activists, to develop practical solutions. So the effectiveness of new atheists lies in their ability to critique and challenge religious dogma, sparking necessary debates and promoting secularism. The absence of detailed policy prescriptions does not diminish the impact, rather it highlights the division of labour in societal progress, where critics and policymakers play different but complementary roles. So in conclusion, I wholeheartedly agree with Joe's assessment on several points. I think it's always good to sort of end on sort of the points where there is like strong agreement or areas of concord. So when it comes to the burden of proof, I think that he's completely correct when it comes to debates between atheists and theists, that the atheist also shares the burden of proof. The new atheists fail to distinguish between various conceptions of God, be they pantheism and deism, etc. I think that their sort of caricature of God as a sort of glorified Zeus figure, in his own words, I think is quite apt. I think that their sort of philosophical errors and lack of philosophical rigor are both completely accurate, particularly the latter. But as I argued previously, I don't think that that's that big an issue. So Joe's advocacy for focusing on issues rather than personal attacks, avoiding psychologizing and striving for impartiality, I believe is crucial and is one of his best traits. His insistence on specificity is vital, especially his observation that expertise in one field does not imply expertise in another. Opposing fundamentalism in all its forms is essential. The fact that the new atheist, in Joe's word, woke him from his dogmatic slumbers is, in my opinion, enough to justify the entire movement. So yeah, on that note, I would really appreciate if you'd like, share, subscribe if you want to see more content, and I wish you all the best. And this is Sam Kaiser signing off.